Let's get to it. Number 5. The Lie of Stalingrad, General Paulus's Fatal Optimism. November 23, 1942. A message clatters onto the teleprinter at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia. It is from General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the Sixth Army. It confirms the Führer's worst fears and his general's most dire warnings. Soviet pincers have snapped shut. Over 300,000 German soldiers are trapped in a frozen cauldron around the city of Stalingrad. The strategic problem facing Paulus is not merely military, but psychological. He must report a catastrophe of unimaginable scale to a leader who has explicitly forbidden any retreat, any hint of surrender. The choice is binary: tell the unvarnished, career-ending truth, or tell a lie of omission that conforms to the Führer's fantasy of unbreakable German will. Paulus chose the lie. His initial reports were masterpieces of fatal optimism. Instead of describing a hopeless entrapment, he reported a temporary encirclement. Instead of demanding an immediate breakout, he signaled that his fuel supplies were almost exhausted and ammunition was acute, but framed it as a logistical challenge rather than a prelude to annihilation. This was the lie Hitler needed to hear. It allowed him to forbid a breakout and accept the boastful, baseless promise from Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring, who swore his air force could supply the Sixth Army. Göring claimed he could deliver 500 or at least 300 tons of supplies per day, a figure his own staff knew was impossible. The inevitable consequence was a slow, agonizing death sentence. The Sixth Army required a minimum of 750 tons of supplies daily just to survive, let alone fight. The Luftwaffe, crippled by the Russian winter and relentless Soviet fighter attacks, on its best day delivered a fraction of that. The daily ration for a German soldier, once the envy of the world, shrank to 150 grams of bread and a few ounces of horse meat. Tanks without fuel became useless steel coffins. Artillery pieces fell silent for lack of shells. As the weeks turned to months, the Sixth Army simply starved and froze to death, while Paulus continued to send reports of heroic resistance, feeding the fantasy in Berlin. When the end came in February 1943, of the nearly 300,000 men trapped, 147,200 were dead. Another 91,000 were marched into captivity, from which only 5,000 would ever see Germany again. The annihilation of the Sixth Army was the direct result of a chain of command poisoned by fear. Paulus's lie of omission, designed to avoid Hitler's wrath, was validated by Göring's lie of capability, designed to curry favor. The result was the greatest single defeat in German military history, a turning point on the Eastern Front. It proves a terrifying strategic lesson. In a totalitarian system, the truth becomes the most dangerous contraband. When a leader punishes dissent, his generals will not give him accurate intelligence. They will give him a comfortable fiction, even if that fiction costs 300,000 lives.
Number 4. The Lie of Operation Bagration, the Collapse of Army Group Center. June 1944. All eyes are on Normandy. The German High Command is convinced the decisive theater of the war is now in France. On the Eastern Front, Field Marshal Ernst Busch, commander of Army Group Center, is sitting on a massive salient bulge in the German lines. Soviet intelligence, with a masterful campaign of deception known as Maskirovka, has convinced OKH that the main Soviet summer offensive will strike in the south, towards Ukraine. The strategic problem for Busch is that his own intelligence officers are reporting a terrifying buildup directly in front of him. His army group is dangerously weak, having been stripped of 15% of its divisions and 88% of its tanks to reinforce other sectors. He must now decide, does he trust his own eyes and risk contradicting the Führer's strategic assessment? Or does he report what Berlin wants to hear? Bush, a man known more for his loyalty to Hitler than his strategic brilliance, chose to lie. He ignored the frantic reports from his subordinates and assured the high command that his front was stable and that the Soviet buildup was merely a feint. He endorsed the institutional fiction that the real danger was in the South. This lie, born of incompetence and a deep-seated fear of being labeled a pessimist, was precisely the confirmation bias Hitler's headquarters craved. They kept the Panzer reserves in the south, leaving Army Group Center's 600-mile front held by hollowed-out infantry divisions with virtually no armored support. The consequence was Operation Bagration, which began on June 22, 1944. It was not a battle. It was an annihilation. The Red Army achieved a staggering 10-to-1 superiority in artillery and 8-to-1 in tanks on the points of attack. They didn't just break the German lines, they vaporized them. Within 3 weeks, 28 of Army Group Center's 34 divisions ceased to exist. The offensive tore a 250-mile-wide hole in the Eastern Front, resulting in the destruction of the 3rd, Panzer, 4th, and 9th Armies, and inflicting around 450,000 German casualties. It was a strategic catastrophe that dwarfed Stalingrad, an entirely self-inflicted wound born from a general's lie. The destruction of Army Group Center was a direct consequence of institutional groupthink. The German General Staff, once the most feared military machine in the world, had become an echo chamber that reinforced the Führer's delusions. Field Marshal Bush's lie wasn't just a personal failure. It was the failure of a system that prioritized comforting assurances over brutal realities. The strategic lesson is timeless. Arrogance is the ultimate fog of war. When an army's high command believes its own deceptions, it is already defeated before the first shot is fired.
Number 3. The Lie of the Bulge. Autumn, 1944. The Third Reich is bleeding from 1,000 wounds. Allied bombers pulverize its cities daily. The Red Army is at the gates of East Prussia, and the Western Allies are pushing against the Rhine. In this atmosphere of impending doom, Hitler conceives one final apocalyptic gamble, a massive armored offensive through the Ardennes forest aimed at splitting the Allied armies and capturing the vital port of Antwerp. The strategic problem for his generals, men like Gerd von Rundstedt and Walter Model, was that the plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, was a logistical work of pure fiction. The German army was critically short of everything, but most importantly, it was short of fuel. The generals lied. Von Rundstedt and Model both proposed more realistic, limited objectives, but were categorically rejected by Hitler. Instead of refusing to carry out a suicidal order, they collectively signed off on a plan they knew was impossible. The lie was embedded in the logistical tables. The offensive's success hinged entirely on the fantasy that the Panzer spearheads could advance so quickly that they would capture massive American fuel dumps intact. German planners estimated they only had enough fuel to cover 1/3 to 1/2 the distance to Antwerp under combat conditions. They were knowingly sending Germany's last armored reserves on a mission that was mathematically doomed from the start. The consequence was the Battle of the Bulge. The initial surprise was a stunning success, but the fantasy quickly collided with reality. The rapid advance the plan depended on never materialized. Small groups of determined American soldiers held crucial crossroads, throwing the German timetable into chaos, and the Allied fuel dumps were never captured. Retreating U.S. troops simply burned them. As early as December 19th, spearhead units like Kampfgruppe Piper of the 1st SS Panzer Division reported they were out of gasoline, their powerful King Tigers reduced to 70-ton roadblocks. Germany's final offensive didn't end with a bang, but with the pathetic whimper of engines sputtering and dying, leaving the elite of the Panzerwaffe to be systematically destroyed from the air. The Ardennes offensive was the ultimate failure of strategic integrity. Hitler's generals, trapped between their professional duty to the state and their fear of the dictator, chose to endorse a lie. They sacrificed their remaining armies to appease the fantasy of one man. The strategic lesson is a fundamental axiom of warfare, first articulated by Napoleon. An army marches on its stomach. Willpower cannot conjure fuel. Audacity cannot create supply lines. The Battle of the Bulge proves that logistics is not a part of warfare, it is the entirety of warfare, and any plan that ignores this truth is nothing more than a blueprint for disaster.
Number 2. The Lie of Normandy, the Paralysis at the Falaise Pocket. August 7, 1944. The German front in Normandy is not just cracking, it's disintegrating. The American breakout, Operation Cobra, has shattered the German left flank. Now, General Patton's Third Army is executing a vast, sweeping maneuver, driving south and then hooking east to encircle the entire German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army against the Seine River. For Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, the Commander-in-Chief West, the strategic problem is terrifyingly clear. He must immediately order a full-scale retreat, or his entire army group will be trapped and annihilated. There is just one obstacle: Adolf Hitler. Hitler, remote in East Prussia, is demanding the exact opposite: an all-out, desperate counterattack at Mortain, codenamed Operation Lüttich. Von Kluge lied through hesitation and delay. Compounding his dilemma was the fact that he was deeply implicated in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. He was a marked man, operating under a death sentence, and he knew it. Paralyzed by fear of the Gestapo more than the Allied armies, he failed to tell Hitler the unvarnished, brutal truth: that a counterattack was pure suicide and the pocket was closing. Instead of ordering the retreat his instinct screamed for, he obediently launched Operation Lüttich. It was a catastrophe. The assembled panzers were obliterated by Allied fighter bombers. Even as the attack failed and the jaws of the Allied trap began to close around Falaise, von Kluge's reports to headquarters remained misleading. He spoke of holding the line when there was no line left to hold. This lie of delay cost the Wehrmacht everything. For nearly a week, as the escape route narrowed to a sliver, he refused to authorize a general withdrawal without the Führer's permission. The consequence was the Falaise Pocket, one of the most brutal killing grounds of the war. When the gap was finally sealed on August 21st, some 10,000 German soldiers were dead and another 50,000 were taken prisoner. The roads were so choked with wreckage and corpses that General Eisenhower would later write, "It was literally possible to walk for hundreds of yards at a time, stepping on nothing but dead and decaying flesh." The disaster at Falaise was the direct outcome of a command structure based on terror. Von Kluge's paralysis demonstrates a core strategic vulnerability. When a general fears his own leadership more than the enemy, rational military decision-making becomes impossible. A climate of fear does not breed loyalty or efficiency. It breeds fatal hesitation and deceptive reporting. The lesson is that a commander who rules by fear will never receive the timely, accurate information needed to make sound strategic judgments, ensuring that tactical defeats will inevitably escalate into strategic calamities.
Number 1. The lie of the fortresses. The commanders who pretended they could hold out. The year is 1944. As Allied and Soviet armies advance relentlessly from east and west, Hitler issues a new, nihilistic decree. Key coastal ports like Cherbourg and Brest in France, and dozens of cities on the Eastern Front are to be declared Festungen, fortresses. The order is simple and absolute. They are to be held to the very last man, the very last bullet. For the generals commanding these doomed garrisons, the strategic problem is existential. They have no hope of relief, no chance of victory. Their orders are not a strategic maneuver, but a demand for ritual suicide. Their choice is between obeying an insane order that guarantees their destruction, or surrendering and being branded a traitor. The commanders lied. To a man, they radioed back the required pledges of fanatical resistance. General von Schlieben in Cherbourg, General Romke in Brest, they all transmitted messages of unwavering loyalty, promising to fight to the death as the Führer commanded. They knew it was a lie. They knew the fortresses, cut off and massively outnumbered, would fall. This act of obedient deception was a cynical charade, played for the benefit of an audience of one in Berlin. It was a lie to preserve their honor in the eyes of the regime, even as it condemned their men to pointless deaths. The consequences were uniform and tragic. In Brest, 75,000 American troops were tied down for weeks in a brutal siege that cost them nearly 10,000 casualties and utterly destroyed the city. When the garrison finally surrendered, the port facilities had been so thoroughly demolished they were useless to the Allied war effort. The same story played out in Cherbourg, Boulogne, Calais, and countless other fortresses. Tens of thousands of veteran German troops who could have been withdrawn to defend Germany itself were sacrificed in these futile last stands, bleeding the Wehrmacht for absolutely zero strategic gain. The fortress strategy was the final, logical endpoint of a military culture that had replaced strategic calculus with ideological fanaticism. The generals' lies, their empty promises to hold out, were the last gasps of a system that had become completely divorced from reality. It demonstrates a chilling lesson about the nature of warfare. When obedience is valued more than outcome, a military ceases to be a tool for achieving political aims and becomes purely a mechanism for self-destruction. It is the final, terrifying proof that the greatest strategic blunder is to forget why you are fighting. So now you know the real strategic truth. History is not a series of random events. It is a brutal calculus of decisions and consequences. It is a story of lies told in war rooms, of fatal optimism and institutional cowardice that doomed millions. Our job is to deconstruct that calculus for you every single time. If you believe that understanding the past is the only way to understand the present, then you are in the right place. Subscribe, and we'll see you for the next briefing.